there are people within the government saying that whatever decision is taken, it would be a shit sandwich. On the one hand, the political pain of a broken promise in order to presumably save $183.4 billion over 7 years, in the unlikely event that Labor lasts that long, or $15.7 billion in the first year. But remember this, Dr. Chalmers doesn't want to start hoodwinking the electorate. These amounts are already provided for in the forward estimates. By 2024, when the tax cuts are due, and when you see where interest rates are going, the forecasts, if ever you can believe forecasts, argue there would be a downturn in economic growth in 2024, and that the economy would be, quote unquote, very weak, and that we might have got inflation back to 3%, but the increases in interest rates would have bashed the stomach out of the economy. So all this makes 2024 a perfect time for tax cuts. The ACTU, via Sally McManus, argued yesterday that that money should be used to fund higher pay for care workers and for families struggling with a rising cost of living, that the Labor Party supported stage 3 in 2018 when the world was a very different place. Her words, quote, "There was no COVID and no lockdowns, there was no JobKeeper, and while wages were stagnant then, workers were not facing the absolute cost of living crisis confronting them today," unquote. She argued, and her views deserve consideration, quote, "Good policy is having an open and honest national conversation about the problems we face. It requires adaptation to changing circumstances," unquote. Now, all of that sounds perfectly valid, but there are two realities. The higher the income tax rate, the greater the disincentive to work. The second point is Labor campaigned in 2019 and 22 federal elections on keeping the tax cuts. Labor are entitled to be concerned about the political fallout from a broken promise 5 months after the election, because they're talking about this announcement being made in the budget in 2 weeks. This is an acid test for Treasurer Jim Palmer's. An analysis of the tax cuts reveals that while stage 3 does benefit the top 10% of taxpayers, and I've already explained why that is so, it also delivers tax cuts to the top 78% of taxpayers. They'll all get a tax cut. Anyone with a taxable income over $45,000 or over benefits from stage 3. Now, it's a waste of space listening to people like Adam Bant, who rants that the wealthiest 20% get close to 80% of the money. You dope. Someone should explain to Mr. Bant that might be because the top 20% of workers in Australia are paying 80% of all the tax. The Prime Minister has been asked regularly whether he's committed to the tax cuts. Perhaps Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, should note the Prime Minister's comments when asked whether he would drop the tax cuts to accommodate the Greens. On May 16, the PM said of stage 3, quote, "They have been legislated. We support them. We stand by that. We don't support the Greens." On May 19, Mr. Albanese said, "People are entitled to have that certainty of the tax cuts that have been legislated," unquote. Prime Minister, you need a meeting with your Treasurer and tell him what you've said. Or is the ambitious Dr. Chalmers umming and ahhing about whether to reverse the tax promise, deliberately digging a hole for Prime Minister Albanese to fall into? This Labor tax cut battle may have only just begun.